This guide covers all the actions Dawntrail's Scholar learns from level 30 to 100 in order. We go over how each action is meant to be used and recommend ways to use it when relevant. We start with a tutorial on how to play Scholar at level 30, and then, as we work our way to level 100, going over how to make the most of every action the job learns on its way to level 100. In the final summary at level 100, we outline an optimized opener and explain how it leads into the general rotation alongside 2-minute burst considerations. We also go on to outline specific advice for dungeons and raids, and also touch on the stat properties of the Scholar. I also have videos on more general healing advice, more details on things like the global cooldown and more, with links in the description to all of these for those that want to learn even more. Now then, let's begin with your attacking spells. Rune 1 is your basic attacking spell, and it functions as your filler spell that you use when nothing more important, like healing, takes priority. Incorporating attacking in group combat is a core part of healing in Final Fantasy XIV, so it is better to practice finding time to do so as early as possible. Of course, it is more important to keep your group alive than being too greedy with damage. Bio 2 is your damage over time spell, or DOT for short. You should make sure to keep this active on as many enemies as possible before resorting to Ruin. For healing, let's start with your own tools first. Adloquium applies a heal to your target and then applies a shield equivalent to slightly more than the healing done. Adloquium applies 2 shields if the heal is a critical heal, making a huge difference between a regular cast and a critical one. Adloquium should be your first choice when you need to heal someone that is expected to take more damage within the next 30 seconds. Additionally, you can use Adloquium on the tank as they start to pull to give them a shield before the fight even starts. Physic is your other healing option, which heals for slightly more than Adloquium and costs less MP to cast, but does not apply a shield. If you have to heal someone and a shield will not help, you could use Physic. If you need to heal someone who already has a shield, using Physic is sometimes also more effective, as shields will not stack. This also means that in most situations where you spam heal a target, alternating between Adloquium and Physic to make sure each shield is completely spent before applying another can sometimes be helpful. Note, however, that players not being completely topped up on HP is not a reason to cast heals on them yourself. This will make sense a bit later. Resurrection brings a dead player back to life. It is quite expensive and takes a long time to cast, so outside of desperate situations, you should only cast Resurrection alongside Swift Cast, a roll action that makes your next spell with a cast time instant. This of course means you can only reliably raise someone once per minute. Note that when a player is resurrected, they are completely impervious to damage and effects applied by damage for 5 seconds, unless they do anything other than movement. Using Sprint also removes this effect. Another way you can use Swift Cast is to apply Adloquium to the tank while on the move, which can sometimes be worthwhile. Finally, Ishuna is a roll action that removes a single removable debuff. You can identify a removable debuff by the bluish-white line above the debuff icon. Some debuffs are more important to remove than others. For instance, removing a slow effect, whether it is movement or attack speed, is likely to assist your group more than spending that time casting Ruin. Paralyze is especially important to remove, as the random stuns from it can end up being lethal or especially problematic for mages, including yourself. Sometimes dots can be removed too, and sometimes they can be dangerous, and other times they are so weak that it isn't worth the effort of removing them. You can only tell from the damage the affected player ends up taking and then keeping it in mind for the future. Lucid Dreaming allows you to greatly boost your MP recovery every minute, and I recommend that you use this whenever you are below 8000 MP. If you're actively casting, then most of the value of Lucid Dreaming will still be applied. Lucid Dreaming should absolutely not be kept as a last resort reserve when you're already out of MP. Use it early and often, even if some of the MP it grants ends up going to waste. Now, let's talk about your pets. Your summons, whether it is Eos, Selene or Carbuncle, are all functionally identical, so you're just choosing between which one you like better visually. Your pet will automatically cast Embrace every 3 seconds on whoever needs healing, and typically prioritizes whoever has the least HP % left. This also means that if no one needs healing, your pet will just do nothing. As such, it is important to not waste your own time topping up everyone. Try to keep cool and let your pet do most of the work for you, and only step in and assist when the healing is overwhelming the amount your pet can manage. An advanced technique that can be immensely useful to start practicing early on is manually moving your pet. Under the Pet tab in the Orders section of your actions and traits, you will find the options Place and Heal. Place can be used to, for instance, place your pet in the center of the room to maximize your pet's reach. In fact, Embrace has such a massive range that outside of gigantic Alliance raid arenas, your pet can almost always reach everyone when standing in the center of the arena. You can also adjust your pet's position so that it is somewhere in the middle of your team to maximize its ability to hit your team with other abilities. Once fighting is over, you can then use Heal to make your pet follow you again. Place and Heal are obviously not actions, so you can use these while casting. You also have the ability Whispering Dawn, which orders your pet to use Whispering Dawn. Shocking, really. Which, in an area of effect, or AoE for short, applies a heal over time, HOT for short, in a large area around your pet. This makes it especially important to position your pet somewhere in the middle of your group to optimize it, as while Embrace can reach almost everything while standing in the middle of an arena, Whispering Dawn cannot. Also, be aware that if your pet is following you, it will stop to cast Whispering Dawn at the exact location it stood when you ordered it. If instead you order it to move somewhere and then order Whispering Dawn, your pet will cast Whispering Dawn from the spot you ordered them to move to, causing a potential delay, but it will stand at the spot you wanted it. Embrace, on the other hand, is usually not delayed by movement actions. When your party needs significant AoE healing, use Whispering Dawn. You can also use Whispering Dawn if your tank is taking a lot of damage to help you further. You can unlock the ability to glamour your pet to look different by doing the quest A Fairy Tale Come True, acquired from the Arcanist teacher. Finally, Repose is a role action you can use to crowd control enemies, and weirdly, the damage over time of Bio does not break the effect. However, any other damage will break it, and applying Bio initially also will, so you will probably not need this spell very much. Before moving on to new actions, I want to briefly talk about weaving. In Final Fantasy XIV, spells incur a 2.5 second time frame where you cannot initiate another spell. Abilities do not do this, and furthermore are not impeded by this 2.5 second time frame either. However, abilities still cause an animation lock that prevents you from casting anything else for around a bit more than half a second. Weaving is the concept of weaving abilities between spells. Notably, spells with a cast time of 1.5 or less. You can fit one ability before the next spell. Instant spells allows you to fit two abilities if necessary. As Ruin has a cast time of 1.5, this allows you to easily weave abilities like Lucid Dreaming and Whispering Dawn between two attacks. If you want to learn more about this subject, I have a video that goes in much more depth about this subject. Link in the description. Now then. At level 35, you learn the spell Succor. This action is an AoE alternative to Adloquium. Usually, Succor is more effective than Adloquium if at least two players benefit from the value of both the healing and the shield. However, Succor lacks the shield doubling effect on critical heals that Adloquium has. If more than two players need healing at all, then Succor is also more effective than Physic for just the healing. Regardless, Physic mainly, if not exclusively, is helpful as a cheap option if you're actually running out of MP, which is rare. At level 38, you learn the spell Ruin 2. Confusingly, Ruin 2 is not an upgrade of Ruin 1 for Scholar. In fact, Ruin 2 does slightly less damage than Ruin 1. The advantage of Ruin 2, however, is that it is instant. The damage difference between Ruin 1 and 2 is so small that if you need the greater mobility and freedom of Ruin 2, it is worth using. In fact, until Ruin 1 upgrades to Broiler level 54, Ruin 2 is actually almost equal to Ruin 1 if you are auto-attacking. How's that possible, you might ask? Scholar auto-attacks are surprisingly strong for a mage, and at level 50, they're worth around 19 potency per 2.5 seconds. You auto-attack every 3-ish seconds. This number is actually larger at lower levels. Yes, you still can auto-attack while casting Ruin 1, but each Ruin 1 cast actually delays your next auto-attack by 1 second. In short, casting Ruin 2 repeatedly while auto-attacking is closer to 159 potency each. And casting Ruin 1 repeatedly while auto-attacking is about 164 potency each. Although Ruin 1 will make you much less mobile, making this proposition harder. So Ruin 1 only wins if you actively are auto-attacking too. I have a short way to explain this in slightly more detail if you're interested. At level 40, you learn the ability Fae Illumination, which orders your pet to execute, well, Fae Illumination. This ability causes party members in range to take slightly less magic damage for a bit, while also increasing healing magic potency, meaning they receive more healing from spells. While most of your healing options at the moment are spells, making this insignificant, it is worth pointing out that healing from abilities is not affected by this, meaning, for example, Whispering Dawn. This means that the most important time to make use of this ability is when you're anticipating large magic damage. You should treat the healing boosting component as more of a side bonus most of the time. At level 44, you learn the role action and ability Surecast. This ability makes you immune to most knockbacks, and also makes you immune to interruption as a result of damage. What this means is that sometimes when you're hit with a particularly powerful attack, your spellcast is completely cancelled. This cannot happen when Surecast is active. At level 45, you unlock the Aetherflow gauge, and 3 actions that interact with it. First, Aetherflow, the ability, causes you to recover 20% of your total MP and also gain 3 Aetherflow stacks in your gauge. This should be used on cooldown every minute, meaning you should plan the use of these 3 Aetherflow stacks 1 minute at a time. To spend Aetherflow, you first have Lustrate, which, as an ability, heals one target for a large amount, at the cost of 1 Aetherflow stack. Lustrate should be your primary action to spend Aetherflow with at this level. When doing large pulls in dungeons, consider using Lustrate before resorting to healing spells. Of course, you can alternate between spells and Lustrate if you can see you will be out of Aetherflow for a long time otherwise. Take note that Adloquium and Succor take slightly longer to cast, making them bad options to weave Lustrate alongside. Your second Aetherflow spender is Energy Drain. The only notable effect of Energy Drain is that it does damage, which means if you have Aetherflow to spare and the Aetherflow ability is about to be ready to give you 3 new stacks, you can use Energy Drain between your spellcasts to dump any excess you have before you're given 3 new stacks. Remember, Lustrate should be your primary way of using Aetherflow, so Energy Drain should only be considered at all if you don't need Lustrates. A way you can meter this out is to spend 1 Aetherflow about every 20 seconds or so, but using Lustrates when you need them and Energy Drain moments before Aetherflow becomes ready again is the most effective way to use each of them. At level 46, you learn the spell Art of War, which does the same damage as Ruin 1 in an area around you, with no cast time. I already explained how Ruin 2 measures up to Ruin 1 with auto attacks, so I hardly need to explain why Art of War is superior to Ruin 1 simply because it has no cast time. Until you learn Broil at level 54, your primary attack spell should always be Art of War, and try to find time to do auto attacks as well. If you're stuck far away from the boss for an extended period of time, then Ruin 1 is best since you also cannot auto attack. Ruin 2 should only be used if you need to move and are out of range to use Art of War. Note that Art of War is also superior to Bio 2 if there are at least 3 targets to hit. At level 48, you learn the role action and ability Rescue. This only works in combat and only if you and your target are both in combat. Otherwise, you will either be incapable of using it or the game will report that you missed. Rescue will, after about a second delay, drag your target to the location you were in when you cast it. Knockback immunities like Surecast also makes players immune to Rescue. The delay before the action takes effect means that you may need to react early when you need to use it, for it to be beneficial at all to your target. Remember that Rescue drags the target, so if there's something dangerous between you, this may also cause problems. At level 50, you learn the ability Sacred Soil, which spends an Aetherflow stack to place down a large dome that reduces the damage taken by all party members within it by 10%. Take note that it has a 30-second cooldown unlike your other spenders. You should use Sacred Soil when you're anticipating large AoE damage incoming, or if you measure that the damage your party is taking is large enough that the damage reduction is more valuable than a cast of Lustrate. To more easily place Sacred Soil, go to Character Configuration and under the Target section, toggle Limit Ring Movement to Targeting Range, and press Action twice to execute. This way, you can always place Sacred Soil immediately within a feasible location by pressing its keybind twice. Now, to summarize at level 50, let's cover an actual boss fight opener and rotation, followed by some healing advice. Remember, keeping your party alive is always more important than pushing damage, but being efficient with your time also matters. Make sure your pet is summoned, and then apply Adloquium to the tank before they pull if possible. You can also cast Succor to give everyone a shield. As the tank runs up to the boss, cast Ruin 1, then Bio while weaving Aetherflow and running up to the boss. And then cast Art of War repeatedly. That's basically it. You should make sure to keep Bio active on your targets when there are up to 2 targets, but with more than that, you should simply just use Art of War. For healing, Lustrate should serve as your primary option, and should be used to assist your pet when its healing isn't sufficient enough. You can often let a tank drop below half HP before bothering to do anything, but it depends on how much you heal per Lustrate and on the particular situation, so adjust accordingly. There's also changes as you level up. Whispering Dawn should be your default response to raid-wide damage. This means that Adloquium and Succor should all mainly be considered if you run out of Aetherflow or Whispering Dawn isn't enough or isn't available. Sacred Soil and Fey Illumination each also offer options to reduce the damage your party takes, with the first reducing all damage and the second reducing only magic damage. Use Swiftcast together with Resurrection to efficiently raise another player. Ishuna can be used to remove dangerous or annoying debuffs when you see the bluish-white line indicating a removable debuff. Finally, remember to use Lucid Dreaming early and often, most effective if used when below 8000 MP. With that, let's continue on past level 50. At level 52, you learn the ability Indomitability, an Aetherflow spender that heals in an AoE around you. It is more effective than Lustrate if at least 2 players benefit from it, but keep in mind that it has a 30-second cooldown, so there may be reason to hold on to it if you know there is a better opportunity coming up in a moment. I recommend prioritizing Whispering Dawn over Indomitability for AoE healing, assuming you don't need to heal everyone quickly, as Indomitability comes at the cost of a resource, whereas Whispering Dawn does not. At level 54, Ruin 1 is permanently upgraded to Broil 1, and the potencies of Ruin 2 and Art of War are also boosted slightly. This means that on single target, you now should use Broil, but on 2 or more targets, you should use Art of War. Take note that Ruin 2 is significantly more inferior to Broil than it was to Ruin 1, so while Ruin 2 can easily be used to keep up the attack on the move, moving strategically between spellcasts while using Broil is far superior. At level 56, you learn the ability Deployment Tactics, which copies your Galvanize effects on your target to other party members near them. Note that both Adloquium and Succor apply the Galvanize effect, so you could spread a Succor shield from a surviving shield, or, the recommended method, spread an Adloquium shield from one player to the entire party. Note also that the second shield from critical Adloquium is called Catalyze, and so is not spread by Deployment Tactics. A convenient time to use Deployment Tactics is just before pulling a boss. Use Adloquium on the tank and spread the shield to everyone else. Using the initial shield on the tank is recommended because if it is a critical heal, then the second shield is much more likely to benefit a tank than anyone else. Sometimes you can go a long time without using this action due to its complex nature, and that's okay. At level 58, you learn the ability Emergency Tactics. If you need to heal your party a significant amount, but you know that shields will go to waste or simply not help, whether because damage is not incoming or because the party already has shield, then using Emergency Tactics will replace the shields from your next Adloquium or Succor with more healing, vastly increasing their healing potential. As the name suggests, this ability should be used for emergencies, and so it is not odd if you go a long time without using it at all. At level 60, you learn the ability Dissipation, which removes your pet for 30 seconds, but also maxes out your Aetherflow stacks, and increases your healing magic potency by 20% for the duration. Remember that healing magic potency only affects spells, meaning Adloquium, Succor, and Physic, so while the boost sounds incredibly powerful, it is very limited in its usefulness. For this reason, the primary value in this ability is the Aetherflow generation, and as the use of Dissipation removes your pet for 30 seconds, this means you are losing out on 10 embraces. Given that pets do slightly less damage and healing than players, this equates to about 1500 potency. There are 3 key scenarios where Dissipation can be useful. 1. Since Aetherflows can be spent for damage on energy drain, and doing so can be a damage output gain, this is an option. Just keep in mind that this strategy comes with a tremendous loss of potential healing, and if doing this will force you to cast a single healing spell later in the fight, then all the value gained from using this strategy is lost immediately. 2. If your party or your tank is about to die and you have no other way to save them except Aetherflow actions, you can use Dissipation for this. Just keep in mind that now that your pet's passive healing is gone for a while, you will need to be doing the heavy lifting yourself on that front too. 3. Just before the fight ends in a dungeon context, or just before a longer segment of downtime in a boss fight, use Dissipation to acquire the free Aetherflows. You can even use Adloquium and deployment tactics to make use of the healing bonus. Keep in mind, Dissipation cannot be used unless you're in combat, hence why it has to be used before the fight ends. At level 62, you learn the ability Excogitation, an Aetherflow spender that applies a quote-unquote trap buff to the target. When the target drops below half HP, or the buff runs out naturally, which happens to be equal to its cooldown, the buff applies a massive heal to the target. Unless you expect the tank to take practically no damage at all, you should almost always apply this to the tank on cooldown in dungeon contexts. Make sure to play around it. You don't have to worry nearly as much about keeping the tank healthy while this buff holds. Although, keep in mind that if someone dies straight from over 50% down to 0, then Excogitation will not help them. In a raid context, it may be beneficial to use Excogitation in anticipation of a tank buster to ease the recovery afterwards. At level 64, Broil is upgraded to Broil 2, and Ruin 2's potency is slightly increased, which makes Ruin 2 better than Art of War on single target. At level 66, you learn the ability Chain Stratagem, which is a raid cooldown that you apply to one enemy that improves the critical hit chance of everyone attacking the target. You should make use of this ability as close to on cooldown as you can. Apply it to the healthiest target in a pack of enemies, or use it on a boss. Keep in mind that if there is another scholar present, this effect will not stack, so try to avoid using it at the same time if you can. In a boss fight, it may be worth considering if the boss is about to be unattackable for a while, in which case it may be better to save this cooldown for after they return. At level 70, you learn the ability Aetherpact and unlock the Faerie gauge. Whenever you use an Aetherflow spending action while in combat and your pet is present, you gain 10 Faerie gauge. Using Aetherpact causes your pet to channel a beam that heals for around twice as much as Embrace every 3 seconds at the cost of 10 Faerie gauge each tick. While Aetherpact has a massive range just like Embrace, it is worth keeping in mind that if your target manages to get out of range during the channel, your pet will not move into range and will instead simply wait for them to get back in range, unless you cancel it. Running out of Faerie gauge or using Aetherpact again while it is channeling will cancel the effect. A big benefit of Aetherpact is that as you are choosing who it is channeling on, you can use it to command your pet to heal someone in particular, often the tank. One way to make sure you don't sit at max is to aggressively spend down to 70 whenever you gain Aetherflow, so you are guaranteed to be able to hold the gauge produced by the Aetherflow you currently have. I also recommend prioritizing Aetherpact for healing over using your Aetherflow actions, since it does not come at the cost of a resource you can use on other things. At level 72, Broil 2 and Bio 2 are upgraded to Broil 3 and Biolysis respectively, and Ruin 2 gets yet another potency boost. The notable change this causes is that Biolysis is better than Art of War on up to 4 targets, and so I recommend that in a dungeon context, while the tank is pulling, you should apply Biolysis to as many enemies as you can while they're being collected, and then using Art of War. For single target, these upgrades change nothing. At level 74, you learn the ability Recitation, which causes your next Adloquium, Succor, Indomitability or Excogitation to both cost nothing, and also guarantees that it will be a critical healing effect. Note that Excogitation and Indomitability still produce Faerie gauge despite not costing Aetherflow. With so many ways to use it, let me go over each of them. 1. Recitation Excogitation is a reliable way to use the cooldown, especially in dungeons, as it lines up with every second use of Excogitation, and you usually will be using Excogitation anyway, maximizing the value of both. A critical Excogitation usually completely tops up a tank's HP bar from half too, so this makes it very safe to be aggressive in combat. 2. If you need to recover your party after a large amount of damage, then Recitation Indomitability is a great option. This is typically only really available in a raid context, since in dungeons you are more likely to have already used Recitation on Excogitation. 3. Recitation Adloquium followed by deployment tactics can give your party a reliable and massive shield. This can be good to use on pull or when anticipating a massive raid-wide attack. Note that if you're using this on pull, you could also just fish for a crit before pulling if your raid needs the large shield. In dungeons, this can also be handy if Excogitation is on cooldown at the time, or Excogitation doesn't seem helpful at the moment for whatever reason. 4. You should never Recitation Succor, as it is inferior to all the 3 other options. Due to the power of Recitation, I highly recommend you try your best to find a use for it on cooldown or close to, even if it is to use Excogitation on the tank. Only sit on it if you know you will need it for something specific really soon. Note that you can weave Recitation and Excogitation, for example, with other spells and abilities between them, as long as these are not other actions that can spend Recitation. At level 76, you learn the ability Fae Blessing, which causes instant AoE healing around your pet. I recommend using this, just like Whispering Dawn, before resorting to your Aetherflow actions. The healing is also potent enough that if the tank needs healing on a large pull, it is still worth using considering the short cooldown. At level 78, your Sacred Soil is upgraded to also apply a heal over time for its duration. This healing alone makes Sacred Soil stronger than Indomitability in raw healing, and as strong as Lustrate, and that's while ignoring the damage reduction it also applies. If your group is going to stay in it, Sacred Soil should be used as close to on cooldown as possible. Of course, only if players are going to benefit from the healing or damage reduction. Sacred Soil is also considered far superior to Lustrate, even if just a single target benefits for this reason. At level 80, you learn the ability Summon Seraph, which temporarily replaces your pet with Seraph. Be aware that if you requested your pet to use any abilities before this and they have not been performed yet, these will be lost and you will not be refunded the cooldown. This is commonly known as ghosting. It should be noted that this also happens if you use Dissipation. Seraph uses a superior version of Embrace called Seraphic Veil that applies a shield on top of the regular healing, shielding for the same amount. You also learn the ability Consolation, which replaces the Summon Seraph action while the Seraph is present. Consolation can be used twice and heals everyone in an AoE while also applying a shield for the same amount. I recommend using Consolation near the start of the cooldown and maybe again near the end to maximize the value of the shields. Alternatively, if you summon Seraph to specifically heal the tank, you can use Consolation when the first shield drops from the tank. While the Seraph is on the field, while Whispering Dawn and Fae Illumination are still accessible, they will simply waste the Seraph's time using regular Faerie Actions, and I recommend you either use these before summoning Seraph, or wait until after the Seraph leaves. Summon Seraph seems like a huge cooldown that should be used only for the most desperate moments, but in reality, the cooldown is relatively short on only 2 minutes for its incredible potential, so try to make regular use of it. In a dungeon, you can use Seraph for one of the 2 dungeon pulls between each boss fight, for example. At level 82, Broil 3 and Art of War upgrade to Broil 4 and Art of War 2 respectively, and Rune 2 gets another potency boost. This does not change anything for your rotation. At level 85, Physic, Embrace and Seraphic Veil get a small potency boost, with the pet action boosts being significantly more impactful. Additionally, Adloquium and Succor get a massive boost to the shield they apply. Remember that Adloquium gets twice the value when it crits. Despite all of this, this does not change how you use any of these actions. At level 86, you learn the ability Protraction, which both heals your target, increases their max HP, and causes them to receive more healing from all actions for 10 seconds. 2 particularly useful ways to apply this ability is to use it before Excogitation or Adloquium, or both. Adloquium will of course result in a 10% bigger shield that you can deploy, and Excogitation will benefit from the healing bonus due to the concept known as snapshotting. Note that if you use Protraction after Excogitation, then even if Excogitation's healing activates during Protraction, Excogitation will not benefit from the healing bonus for this very same reason. At level 88, Deployment Tactics cooldown is reduced. The main useful change here is that now the cooldown lines up naturally with Recitation, in case you like to use it with Adloquium. At level 90, you learn the ability Expedient, which reduces the damage taken by everyone in your party, stacking with Sacred Soil. It also applies a speed boost equivalent to Sprint to everyone. In a dungeon context, this ability can be incredibly useful while your tank is pulling, or if someone is far out of position. In raids, this ability can be very helpful for dealing with mechanics with a lot of movement, but it will never be mandatory to use, since no other healer can offer anything similar. At level 92, Chain Stratagem is upgraded to grant Impact Imminent and turn into Baneful Impaction for 30 seconds or until used. Baneful Impaction is an OGD that applies a strong dot to the target and nearby enemies, and should of course be used every time Chain Stratagem is used. At level 94, Swiftcast's cooldown is reduced to 40 seconds, and the damage of Biolysis and Broil is increased. This changes nothing for your rotation. At level 96, Succor permanently upgrades to Concitation, slightly increasing the size of the shields it applies. This does not change how you use it. At level 98, the cooldown of Recitation is reduced to 1 minute. This means Recitation no longer lines up with Excogitation or deployment tactics naturally, but otherwise doesn't change how you use it. At level 100, you learn the ability Seraphism, which has a long cooldown, so it should be used mainly when you really need it. Just make sure you don't treasure it so much you end up never using it. It causes you to automatically pulse healing over time every 3 seconds. It also changes the cooldown of emergency tactics to 1 second, so you can effectively spam it as much as you want. Finally, Adloquium and Concitation turn into Manifestation and Accession, which happen to be 20% stronger than the regular versions, and are instant cast, so you can use them while moving. To round off, let's first talk about an opener for boss fights, followed by more general healing tips and advice to make the most of your tools in dungeons and raids, and finally, briefly touch on stat priorities. Let's begin. Note that using Aetherflows for damage in the opener is optional, and that you should only do this if you're absolutely certain you will not need it for healing. This also applies for Dissipation and also applies for 2-minute bursts. In most situations, I recommend skipping energy drains and Dissipation in the opener unless you're certain. However, I will include them in this demonstration nonetheless. 1.5 seconds before pull, start casting Broil. If you intend to use a gem draft, weave it here as well. Then use Biolysis and weave Aetherflow. Then cast Broil and late weave Chain Stratagem. Then cast Broil weaving Energy Drain 3 times. 1 more Broil and weave Dissipation. 1 more Broil weaving Baneful Impaction, and then 3 more Broils weaving Energy Drain each time. Then finish with reapplying Biolysis just before buffs run out. Note that depending on convenience, you can swap Aetherflow and Dissipation, and if you know you will need Aetherflow after the opener, you can hold the second set of energy drains. If you're not using both Dissipation and Aetherflow, then Baneful Impaction can also be moved to much sooner. This then leads to the general rotation. For dungeon pulls, use Biolysis on up to 4 targets, and spread it while the tank is pulling. Use Out of War over Broil when there are at least 2 targets. Remember to make use of Chain Stratagem and Baneful Impaction every 2 minutes, especially in boss fights to maximize the damage of your party. While Dissipation can be used for some extra damage every 3 minutes, the potential danger in doing so due to the loss of healing means that I recommend you only do so if you're absolutely sure it is safe, as otherwise it will probably flip and become a DPS loss instead. For 2-minute bursts, you follow a similar pattern to the opener, with the key difference being that you could carry the odd-minute Aetherflows to the 2-minute burst to replace the Dissipation Aetherflow. Now, for the healing tips section, let's start with dungeon pull advice. Before the pull starts, apply Adloquium to the tank. You can use Swiftcast to apply Adloquium if the tank is running away from you. Once you're in combat, use Aetherflow and Excogitation as quickly as you can. Depending on preference, you can use Recitation on Adloquium or Excogitation, but do use it on one of them. You can also use Protraction before both of these to boost both the shield and Excogitation by 10%. If the tank needs more healing while pulling, your best option is Lost Rate. Remember that Expedient can help the tank to pull faster if their sprint runs out or isn't ready. When the tank reaches their destination, place down Sacred Soil to cover the area, and make use of your pet actions alongside Excogitation and Sacred Soil to keep the tank alive. In a 3-minute window, you have 12 Aetherflow from Aetherflow and Recitation combined, and using Excogitation and Sacred Soil on cooldown will spend 10 of these. While generally you won't use both precisely on cooldown, the important detail is that you don't have Aetherflow to spare to cast unnecessary lost rates. While Excogitation still holds on the tank, you can safely rely on just pet actions to keep them alive without worry. Remember Aetherpact and Fey Blessing, and Whispering Dawn. It is a good idea to plan Seraphism and summon Seraph for each pull, 1 for each. As both of them don't resolve the situation quickly, they require you to use them a bit preemptively. Although Seraphism is a lot more capable of saving a pull if needed. At such a point, you may also need to assist healing with spells, instead of just spamming Out of War. In such a scenario, it is fine to rely on options like Adloquium and even emergency tactics. For raids and dungeon bosses, it is a lot more complicated, and the simplest answer is to make sure to use your toolkit efficiently to deal with each mechanic. If a tank is taking a lot of regular damage, using Excogitation on cooldown is wise. However, saving Recitation for Indomitability can also be beneficial if you're anticipating large amounts of AoE damage, as Indomitability gains more value from Recitation than Excogitation does, if at least 3 players benefits from the full healing. If you can, try to play Sacred Soil to cover as much of the raid as possible to maximize the healing and damage reduction. For tank busters, your best bet is to assist with Protraction. If you don't have to, you shouldn't bother applying Adloquium. And remember, the more efficiently you make use of your pet cooldowns, the less you need to use your Aetherflow for healing, and that means you could use the excess that you won't need for energy drain, boosting your damage and killing the boss very slightly faster. As raid bosses follow a set pattern, it is often beneficial to plan your cooldowns ahead of time on very hard fights, so you have enough cooldowns for each mechanic. This means that instead of saving things like Summon Seraph and Seraphism as a last resort, you plan it for a particularly difficult mechanic. Finally, regarding stat priorities, take note that in nearly every single case, item level beats out optimal secondary stats. This means you should always prioritize gear with higher item level, as long as it has mind on it. After that, Scholar's stat priority is critical hit, then enough spell speed, then direct hit, and finally determination. What is meant by enough spell speed is that items with critical hit and spell speed on them are all good, but if you're going to meld materia, I recommend only melding spell speed if a single materia will reduce your GCD by 0.01, or if you're targeting a very specific GCD. Scholar does not actually benefit that much from spell speed, so you can also choose to not go for any. While direct hit does not actually boost your healing output, and determination does, the fact that healers never find direct hit on their gear naturally means that melding direct hit materia will be better for increasing your damage output. If you are worried about lack of healing while progressing hard content, determination can sometimes be worth prioritizing higher. Finally, Piety is a stat that increases healers' passive MP regeneration in combat. However, it does not provide anything else. So, if you don't run out of MP while using your tools like Aetherflow and Lucid Dreaming, then any excess Piety you have on your gear is worthless. As such, while Piety can sometimes be necessary to meet the MP demands of an encounter, Scholar is capable of functioning without it, so you should only go out of your way to get extra Piety if you know you need it. Additionally, keep in mind that spell speed directly increases the amount of MP you will use in a fight, so this can also be a factor in your decision to get Piety. Unfortunately, this is a more subjective stat, and so you have to make this decision for yourself. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, at the release of Dawntrail, a bug caused the trait Enhanced Healing Magic's effect of boosting Embrace and Seraphic Veil to no longer function, simply making the trait not boost healing for these spells. This was aimed to be fixed in 7.1, so that should be fixed by now, of course.